I tried to turn, and the squirrel ran in the direction of where I was going. So I turned to avoid him, and he ran back the other direction, and I ended up slamming into a tree. And the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand, and I needed to go into surgery. So my mom drove me down that day, and when I get into the operating room, when they went to give me the anesthesia, I had some kind of a horrible reaction, and it stopped my heart. And I had never had surgery before. I don't think I'd ever spent really any time in a hospital. I had no idea what to expect. And then once my heart stopped, I had this extraordinary experience that we now call a near-death experience. And what was so interesting is that I was only officially dead for 7 minutes.
The two biggest questions from my perspective in life: why are we here and what happens after we die? Well, we examine near-death experiencers' accounts from all over the world, men and women, and their fascinating trips across the veil. We appreciate you joining us here on the channel, and don't forget, when you're done, if you wouldn't mind, to like, share, and subscribe, and leave us your comments. We have another outstanding guest. You know, we bring you these stories of near-death experiencers, clinicians, and academicians to help give you more of a baseline for what we can expect when we transition. I mean, these are the pioneers of consciousness. These are people who have experienced the other side, many of them skeptics before they went, and they have a remarkable account of what happened to us, what happens to us rather, when we transition. So I would like to bring in now our guest for today, John Davis, graciously joining us from his home in Colorado. And John, thank you so much for being here today. You have a fascinating account. I'm looking forward to exploring that.
Hey, Mark, thank you so much for the invitation. I always enjoy sharing my story. So thank you so much for letting me come on your show and tell you all about it.
Well, let's start at the beginning. What were you like growing up? What was your family like? Were you guys extremely spiritual or not? I think you said you were raised in a Catholic background.
Yeah, my dad was raised a Catholic, and he used to take us to church sometimes 2 or 3 times during the week, and then also on Sundays. So I grew up with Catholicism, and I don't know if we were really, I wouldn't say we were spiritual. It was more of a religious kind of a family, kind of a religious background. And I remember I was always afraid of religion, afraid of what happens when we die. I never really understood it. And after I had my NDE, all of that changed. I became much more spiritual, had a much more grounded philosophy in terms of why we're here, how it all happened, the purpose of life, God, and the idea of heaven or the other side. And it all started really when my grandmother passed. I was 11 when she passed. And I remember thinking, how is it possible that everything that she was, how can that just be gone? It never made any sense to me. And then when I had my NDE, I was like, oh my gosh, now I get it. Now I understand. And ever since then, my whole life has been about trying to share what I learned.
So you're 21 years old, and it's actually kind of a whimsical, funny story if you can laugh at it a little bit. Talk about your interaction with the squirrel and how that got you into the hospital, and then ultimately the anesthesia took you to the other side.
Yeah. I'll tell you exactly what happened. My dad was in sales in his whole career, and one year he won 2 mopeds, or 2, I guess what we'd call scooters now. And we used to ride them all over the neighborhood. And I was out one weekend riding around, and I was coming across this corner, and there was a squirrel sitting right in the middle of the road. So I went to turn. I was probably going too fast, but I tried to turn, and the squirrel ran in the direction of where I was going. So I turned to avoid him, and he ran back the other direction, and I ended up slamming into a tree. And the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand, and I needed to go into surgery. So my mom drove me down that day, and when I get into the operating room, when they went to give me the anesthesia, I had some kind of a horrible reaction, and it stopped my heart. And I had never had surgery before. I don't think I'd ever spent really any time in a hospital. I had no idea what to expect. And then once my heart stopped, I had this extraordinary experience that we now call a near death experience. And what was so interesting is that I was only officially dead for 7 minutes, but the experience that I had, it felt like I was gone for 2 hours. It was just absolutely extraordinary. I could not believe that everything that I saw and experienced happened in 7 minutes of Earth time. It was just extraordinary.
Well, and that brings us to one subject, and we'll continue with the story, but I always find it fascinating that most people like yourself who have experienced going to the other side of the veil will tell us that time as we know it is not linear. Time is simultaneous. So when you're there, yeah, I could see it would really change your definition of what time was, because it's not the same type of time that we deal with in this third dimension.
Exactly. Yep. What's really interesting too is from the perspective when you're on the other side or you're on heaven, a lifetime feels like 3 or 4 months. But to us, a lifetime could be 80 or 90 years. That's why when people have always asked me, what do people, when they pass, do they grieve for us like we grieve for them? And they do grieve, but it's different. For them, it's like, I'm going to see them in just a little while. It's not going to take very long for their lifetime to be finished. So they don't have the same kind of grief that we do. So that's part of my message, is to share that nobody really dies. Nobody really, their life doesn't just end. They're just in a different place. And that's what my whole message has been for all these years.
Well, and I think the soul is an imprint of divinity. We're all connected to the one, right? Consciousness is. And so if you want to characterize it as God or consciousness or the great turtle or whatever a Native American tradition would say it is, it's comprehensive. And the beauty in my mind's eye of stories like yourself is say that we have still have the autonomy to do and the freedom to go left or right. But as you say, you sat down for your pre-birth plan. You knew, and I think you said Alan was your spirit guide. Was that who guided you through this remembering, as it were, of what you agreed to prior to this incarnation?
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly what happened. When I woke up in that building, I heard in my left ear, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." Well, back when this happened, it was 1987, and I had never heard of a spirit guide. I didn't even know what that was. The only thing I equated that to was in Catholicism, they would call them angels.
Right.
But I learned that every one of us, we all have a spirit guide, and they actually help us plan our lifetime. And they are with us throughout the duration of our entire life.
And so we'll go back now, because I kind of jumped ahead a little bit, but so you see yourself laying on the table in the hospital, you're catapulted into this incredibly ornate and shiny, almost like Greek kind of architecture. And you come down this hallway. Take it from there and take us through the actual step-by-step of what happened.
Sure. Well, I'll give your listeners a rundown. This will kind of help them understand why my experience was kind of unique. When we hear about someone's near-death experience, typically we hear about them, there's some kind of an accident, or they died during a surgery, and they come out of their body, their soul comes out, they see themselves looking at themselves, and then they become aware of a tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel, there's this bright white light. And as they start going down this tunnel, they're met by someone, a loved one, a family member, a friend, someone who tells them, it's not your time, you have to go back. So we've never really known what happens on the other side of that white light. But what they did with me, and I still to this day don't understand how they did that, but I didn't have the tunnel experience. They put me on the other side of the white light. And that's where my story starts. So when I died and I woke up, I was standing in the most beautiful building I have ever seen. It was the one you just described, all this beautiful white polished marble. And the building was It was this long building. It was so long, I could not see the end of it. It was all white marble. And on my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." And what happened is he took me on this journey that he was telling me everything I was seeing, the things I experienced, and everything that I was going through. He took me to this journey of all these different places and told me what I was seeing. So when I looked off to my right, I saw these huge 20 or 30-foot marble columns, just like you would see in Greece or Rome. Beautiful white marble, all the way down as far as you could see, maybe 6 feet apart.
Wow.
In the middle of this corridor building were these round marble tables about the size of somebody's average kitchen table. And each table had 4 marble benches around it. And again, there must have been thousands of these tables going down. And there were 2 people sitting at every one of these tables. I'll tell you what that was in just a second. Then I looked to my left, and to my left, all the way down as far as you could see, were these doorways or tunnels. They looked like doorways that had been cut out of solid marble. And if you looked inside of them, it was like looking into space. It was all black. And my guide said, these are the tunnels that people come through. They connect the other side with Earth.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I didn't think to ask what these were made of, because the whole time, Mark, I didn't even know that I died. I didn't know that I was having an experience that people have when they pass. So he's telling me all these things, and there were 2 people sitting at every one of these tables. And he told me that what they are, they're orientation counselors. That on the other side, what they love to do is help people remember where they're from. So here's what happened. My guide said, look at the next tunnel. So I looked at the next tunnel, and there was a man coming through. He was an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s or 90s, and he was doing this. He had his right hand over his chest like he had pain. And my guide said he just passed from a heart attack. And these tunnels, all of us come through these tunnels when our lifetimes are finished. That's how we get back home again. Because the other side, or heaven, whatever people want to call it, that's our real home. That's where we come from. Our lifetimes here on earth are just temporary. They're not meant to be forever, because it's not our forever home. We just come here to learn, to grow, and to experience. And what these counselors do, they help people remember that they just finished a lifetime and now they're back on the other side again. And the reason that they're there is and I think it's a God thing, that God set this whole thing up, that most of us don't remember where we're from when we come into a lifetime.
Because we had the veil.
Yeah. And I wish that I could explain how that works. I don't get it. I don't know how that veil is there, but it's lifted when we get back. But in earth, when you're in a lifetime, most of us don't remember. We spend our whole lives trying to figure out there's got to be more than what we're being told. There has to be more about life and the purpose of life and God and the afterlife. And most of us don't know until we finish our lifetime. So this man is coming through holding his chest. This woman that was the closest to him, she stood up. She walked over to him. She took his hands in hers and she led him back to the table, and they sat down and they started talking. I was too far away. I couldn't hear what she was saying to him, but my guide was telling me that she's explaining to him that he just finished a lifetime on earth. He passed from a heart attack, and now he's back on the other side and he's back home again. And my guide said to watch him. So I'm watching him, and all of a sudden he begins to change. He changed from an elderly gentleman into a man in his early 30s. And I didn't think to ask, well, why is that? Is it because Jesus died when he was in his 30s, or what's the reason? And I never thought to ask that question, other than the fact that I just knew that on the other side, that's how God created us. We're all in our early 30s on the other side. So he changes, he gets all of his memories back. He remembers who he is, where he's from, all of his other lifetimes, and he becomes integrated again, just like you do when you go back home. So he stands up, he walks off to the right, and he walks down between these columns. About in 3 steps, he walks down into what I call the gardens. I don't know if that's what they call it, but that's what it looked like to me. It was the most beautiful gardens you could possibly imagine, the greenest grass you've ever seen, and flowers and trees, and it looked like a perfect manicured English garden. Have you ever seen those when they're
Oh,
perfect?
sure.
Yeah, they look perfect. That's what this looked like. And there were all these people standing there. There must have been hundreds of people. And my guide said to me, all these people are here to greet him from his life. All the people that he knew that had passed before him, plus all the people that he already knew on the other side, were there to greet him. And my guide said that a lot of people don't realize this, but when you come to Earth, it's a really big deal, because there are many, many souls who don't want to come here. The reason is because it's so hard. All of us go through really hard, tragic, difficult, heartbreaking times here. And that's why all those people were there. They were congratulating him, they were clapping, everybody was hugging him. It was like this big, huge party. And my guide said we all have a reunion. What also was so amazing about that is all of our animals are there too.
Oh,
And I had never
nice.
known that. I never knew that God also created animals with souls. So any pets that you've had growing up, or pets you have now that you lost, they're also going to be there when we cross over. And I thought that was just absolutely extraordinary.
Now, let me ask you a really
And
quick
then,
question
and then,
about
yeah,
the group. Did they all present as 30 as well? Did they all, were their
yeah,
countenances
yeah,
like people who were 30 years old?
yeah, exactly.
Huh,
Yep.
very
And what's
interesting.
really interesting is and I don't know how we know this, but you know who your grandmother was, even though she doesn't look like she did when she passed. We all know who everybody is.
Everybody
And
has a sense that permeates
yeah,
outward, I believe. And
yeah,
so you can identify with that vibration or frequency if you want.
exactly. And even though, let's say your parents lived to be in their 90s, like my dad did, when we cross, even though they don't look like that, we still know who they are. Oh, that was my dad, or that was my mom, or that's we just somehow we know all of that. And I can't really understand how that's possible, but we do. And then here's what happened. Then this whole thing starts to unfold. And what happened is my guide Alan, he took me to these different places. He took me to the outside. Believe it or not, there are buildings there. I mean, just like we have buildings here. And again, I can't explain how that's possible, but they're
Hmm.
there. He takes me to the outside of these buildings first, and then we go to the inside, and he tells me all these things about what I'm seeing. So this whole thing starts to unfold. And one thing that I forgot to mention that I can tell your listeners is, if they go to my website, they can see a lot of the things looked like that what I saw. I've got a friend who used AI and put together a lot of these different pictures. And the building that I was in, that was called the Orientation Center, where it has all the tunnels,
Mm-hmm.
there's a building in the country of Turkey that's called the Temple of Artemis, Artemis. And it looks very similar to what I saw on the other side.
Interesting.
If they want to do a Google search, you can see it. So then he takes me to this building, this huge, gigantic, rectangular building. It was all made of white marble, and it had white marble columns all along the outside of it. It was just a huge building. Then he takes me to the inside, and he takes me to a room, and it's a round room, perfectly round. just like a big circular room. And I noticed that above me, there must have been 15 or 20 um, movie screens all in a circle all around me. And my guide said, "This is the life review."
Interesting.
And I don't know if this is what happens to all of us in terms of order of how things work. I don't know if you
How it was presented. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if we have the reunion, then we have the life review. I don't know how that works yet, but I think this is kind of what the process is like. That's why they showed me. So he says, "This is a life review." And then all of a sudden, every one of these screens lit up, and they started playing a movie. And every screen was a movie about my life. And what it was every screen that I looked at was a different age. One was of me as a little toddler, one was of me as an infant, one was of me in my first grade in kindergarten. And it was the ability to look at your life. And the whole idea was that we have a life review to see how we did. Did we accomplish what we set out to accomplish? And one thing that was so extraordinary is you can feel how your actions affected other people.
Mm-hmm.
There was one of the screens was playing something that I totally forgot about. When I was a little kid in elementary school, we were out at recess, and we had a kid in our class named Troy. And Troy had some kind of either Parkinson's or MS, something where he couldn't use his legs and he had to walk with crutches. Well, one day he fell, and I went over there. I ran up to him, picked him up, helped with his crutches, and helped him, dust off and everything. And I never thought anything about that. Like it's something that all of us would do.
Right.
But
It's the right thing to do. Right.
Yeah. And I never thought anything about that. And to him, I could feel how that made him feel. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that I made a difference with him today. So we can feel the good things, but you also can feel anything that you may have done to hurt somebody else. And the whole reason that the life review was so important is it's the greatest teacher of the soul. If you hurt somebody, you will actually feel how you made that person feel. And that's what teaches the soul. It's the greatest teacher of how we learn. And everybody has to go through a life review. And it's not like there's any kind of punishment. There's no judgment. There's no hell. Nobody judges us. We look at the life review with our guide, the person that actually helped design our lifetime to what we wanted to learn and to experience. And so that was the first part, was this life review. Then we leave, and he takes me to another gigantic building. Again, rectangular, beautiful columns out front. And we go on the inside. And this time he takes me to a room that looked like what we would call was a modern movie theater, a long building with a big screen up in front. And he said to me, "I'm going to show you past lifetimes." Well, this was really weird to me, Mark, because as a Catholic, no, they never talk about past lifetimes. It's not something that you're ever told about.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of weird for me. And he explained that we have existed for billions of years. And of course, it's possible to have more than one life. It's totally up to the individual soul. Nobody makes us choose lifetimes. We don't have to come into a lifetime. It's just if the soul wants to learn something that they can't learn on the other side. And he explained to me that heaven, or the other side, the afterlife, it is what God created as a perfect world. It's like what we would call a paradise. There's no wars, there's no hunger, there's no disease, there's no aging, there's no homelessness. None of those things exist there. And so we come here to a planet like Earth to experience what it's like to go through something tough, because it teaches us. And if you look at your own life, the greatest lessons that we have ever learned have come through the hardest times.
Adversity. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the primary reason that we come here. So he says that I'm going to show you different lifetimes. And all of a sudden, the screen lights up and it's me. I didn't look like I do now because we all look different based on our DNA and genes. But
Hmm.
I knew it was me. And what it was me as I had a shaved head. I was probably in my 60s. I had a red robe on, and I was teaching little kids in a monastery.
Hmm.
And this was the lifetime that I had somewhere in Southeast Asia. And that was my job, to teach kids about the monastery. And then that went blank. Then the next one lights up and it's me again. And I have a wheelbarrow, a wooden wheelbarrow, and I have all of these shoes stacked in this wheelbarrow. And I was pushing it down a cobblestone street. And what I did in that life is I fixed people's shoes and I just brought them back to the people in the village. And that life happened somewhere in Eastern, what we would call Eastern Europe today. And then that one disappears. The next one lights up and it's again me. And this time I'm standing in a wooden boat on a lake or an ocean. And I'm casting these fishing nets into the water and pulling them back out. And I was a fisherman. And in that life, my job was to help people with their food. I helped feed the village with fish. And he showed me 3 different lifetimes that I had had and explained to me that a soul can have as many lifetimes as they want. And that's what he went to explain to me about the bicycle part we talked about earlier, that you can tell somebody what it's like to ride a bike, but we don't really know until we do it for ourselves. And that's one of the reasons that we come here. Something that I've always thought about my experience that there are really 2 reasons why we come here. The first one is to help us learn, to grow, to develop, because I think God gave all of us at creation the desire to want to learn, the desire to want to keep growing and learning. And I think the second reason is to help other people, to make a difference, to help others. And one of my favorite quotes is from the Dalai Lama. And he said, "Our purpose in life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them." And I think that is, if we can all do that, come here to learn lessons, to experience, and to help other people, I think we can turn the earth into a paradise too.
Yeah, and I don't know who this quote was attributed to, and I've heard it from multiple people that we're here to walk each other home. So,
Yeah.
the home is where you went for your brief respite and had all this knowledge about the system, as it were, and you brought it back. And now I think it's a perfect time for you to talk about your meeting with Yeshua, aka Jesus,
Sure.
because at least in Christianity in the Western world, if not the whole world, he is the guy, right? So you meet Jesus and he's so radiant, you can't even see his countenance because his vibration is so high. Tell us about that interaction and what his marching orders were for.
Sure. Yeah. At the very end of my experience, when my guide had taken me to all these different places, the last place he took me to was this meadow. And it was the most beautiful place I've ever seen. It was rolling green hills, wildflowers. It was a perfect day. The sun was out. Just a beautiful day. And then he disappeared. And I thought I was standing in this field by myself. So I turned around to look at the rest of this meadow. And right in front of me, there was a gentleman standing there. He had a white robe on. He had a golden sash around his waist, and he had gold colored sandals that laced up his calves. And when I went to look at his face, there was so much light. It was like this. There was light coming out of him, and he was different. Everybody else that I saw, they looked just like we do. Everybody has their own personality. Everyone has their own look. Some people are black, some people are white, some people are Asian. I mean, it's every ethnicity was there. Some people have blonde hair. Some people have dark hair. It's like, it was like being at a city during lunchtime. There was one part of my NDE where I could see all these people, and they look just like we do. Some people wear gowns, some people wear jeans and a t-shirt. It's totally up to how they want to appear. But
Mhm.
everybody I could see. Well, with this being in front of me, I could not see anything about his face, but I knew it was Jesus. It was the entity that we knew as Jesus. And he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." In the very second he said that, it was just like this boom. I woke up back inside the operating room.
Wow.
And ever since that experience, I have been trying to share how my story has impacted me. And one of the greatest things I want to tell people is that death doesn't need to be feared. There is nothing to be afraid of dying, because the happiest day any of us will ever have is our last, because that's the day we get to go back home again. And nobody ever passes alone. Even if your grandmother or your mother or your father died in an accident or something happened where they were by themselves, the other side always sends someone to get us. Nobody ever passes alone. And I think that's probably my greatest message, is to let people know that there's nothing to fear. That's how God set it up. We're supposed to die because that's how we get back home again.
Well, and you get to, as we talked before we came on, to me, it's almost analogous to a play, right? We all have different roles. We all take different shots at life, as it were. A father, a husband, a wife, a daughter, a mill worker, someone who's a technician, someone who's in clergy. And we don't, if you can take that metaphor a little bit further, we don't denigrate somebody who plays the bad guy in a movie as the real guy. That was his role. That was he was an actor. He accepted that role. He carried it off. But it's really hard with all the vitriol in the world right now to look at all the chaos that's there. And then you try to explain to your kids, no, it's fine. These things are going to be fine. How do you deal with the people who are skeptical, and how did you articulate this to your family? Did they embrace your experience?
You know what? When I first came back, I didn't even know what happened. The surgeon, when my eyes opened up and I was back in the operating room, everyone was looking at me, and I said, "What just happened?" I thought they could tell me what was going on, because my first thought when I woke up in that building that I was standing in the orientation center, my very first thought was, "Oh my God, I had no idea the hospital was this big," because the building was so large. When I said to the surgeon, "What just happened?" he said, "We lost you." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You died." That's when I began to realize, oh my gosh, I had something happen. And the only book that was out in the world at that time was Raymond Moody's book, Life After
Mm-hmm.
Life.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're driving back home. My mom is driving me home, and I told her what happened. And she said, "Well, I'm going to give you a book to read." And it was Raymond Moody's book. And I read it that same night. That's when I
Interesting
realized
that she had it at the ready, huh?
Yeah. She had the book. She'd read the book too. I'd never even heard of it. But that's when I realized, when I read his book, I was like, okay. And we didn't have the term NDE yet. This wasn't even coined yet. So I knew that I had seen heaven or the afterlife or the other side. And I never have really had many people argue with me about it. I think what people have mostly been concerned about is the feeling that I got from Jesus in that field. I didn't get from him that we have to follow one religion. It was more like the other side only cares about whatever religion that you follow brings you closer to God. It doesn't matter if you're a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or Christian. None of that matters. Because on the other side, when I was there, I didn't see or get an impression that there are Catholics there, that there are Muslims there. It was more like this spirituality that everybody knew that in life, most people followed some kind of a religion because everybody wanted to believe that there's something after we pass. And so religion has been this process where it's given us something to hold on to something to believe in. But not every religion has truth to it. There isn't just one religion here on earth that has all the truth. And on the other side, when I was there, it was more like there's a deep spirituality about compassion and loving people and kindness and encouragement and the absolute absence of any kind of persecution or judgment. And one of the things I learned was that there's no hell. You know how I know that? Because on the other side, when you're there, you can feel God. You can feel how much this being loves and cherishes every single one of us. It would be like us trying to cast our own children into hell. We could never do that.
Right.
Neither does God. He gives us as many opportunities as we need to learn and to grow. And I just thought that was extraordinary because of how I was raised. I was always raised to be fearful, but there's nothing to fear.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely accurate. And I think that the world is more ready for that message now than ever. People used to be so dogmatic, and there is still an element of that worldwide. But I think that now people are more amenable to look at the spiritual nexus point of each religious tradition and see that as the catalyst that unites them all, as opposed to the pomp and circumstance, everything that we go through perhaps on Sunday afternoon with the chalice and the blessing and all that type of thing. There is a uniformity to love, and love is the ultimate panacea universally. We like to end every show, John, and you'd be perfect to do this, with a kind of a primer for people who won't experience what you did, because even though the statistics are pretty impressive that anywhere from 4 to 15% of the world will go through some type of spiritually transformative or near-death experience, most of us won't. So if you could just kind of catalyze into some salient points for our viewing audience, how they can take your experience and daily utilize that as kind of a benchmark, that would be great.
Sure. I would say that one of the things that I have done that's helped me the most is a daily ritual of meditation. Every morning before I get out of bed, I do a 10-minute meditation where I ask God to make me a better man, make me a better dad, make me a better husband, make me a better friend, and help me to serve and help as many people as I possibly can. And then I tell him all my worries, my concerns, my fears. But that's how I start. And it kind of grounds me to every day to living a life that I'd never forget the things that I saw. Because when I first got back from my NDE, I was so distraught that I really thought about suicide, because I did not understand how was I supposed to live here knowing what it's like over there. I just didn't get it. I want to go back where I was. Mm-hmm. And then when I realized that Jesus gave me this message that you must tell them there is no death, I realized that I was given this task that with my life I'm supposed to share, because they didn't give it just for me. It wasn't ever for me. It was to share it. And ever since then, that's always what I've done. And one of the things I want to convey to people is we don't realize how many people are on the other side who are rooting for us. There are so many people that root for us to do well, because they know that we're all going to face our Mount Everest moments. We all have tough times, and we all feel like, I don't know if I can make it. I don't know if I can get through this. Mm-hmm. They're all there to help us, and we just don't realize what a big deal it is to be here. because nobody's life is an accident. Nobody's life is purposeless or meaningless. Everybody's life has a purpose.
Well, and I think it's very important on that point to amplify, because I don't know about you, but for me, I never really asked for help, right? So to be given help, we're still sovereign beings and they respect our sovereignty, and you have the ability to do whatever you want. But if you're up against it, as you said, and then you say, please, someone give me some guidance or help me through this, this travail. And then, if you give them the license to interject, then I think whether it's an overt act that you get clarity from a memory of your father or your grandmother or someone who is a mentor, then you're able to get that information. But if you don't ask for help, you have your own little fiefdom there. So I'm sure there's rules. They can't invade the fight. Well, Mark's going to go off a cliff. He doesn't know it.
Yep.
So I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of us who are, we're too stubborn to ask for help or to pray to an angel or to whatever we would characterize as a deity, to be open to the help.
Yes, exactly. Because God does hear every single prayer. He absolutely does.
Well, listen, I'm going to put your information in the show notes, but how can people get a hold of you? And do you go speak, or how could they get a hold of any books or anything kind of that encapsulates your story?
Sure. They can go to my website, which is johnjdavis.nde.com. And I have on there a lot of pictures of the different places that I saw, the best representation that I could come up with, so they could see all these different places that my guide took me to. And then if they want to send me an email, I get back to everybody. It takes me a little bit of time, but I get back to everyone. And it's johnjdavis65@icloud.com.
And make sure to clear your browser out so they can get to you.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because I run into the same thing. I'm sure you get a lot of requests and a lot of people that want to reach out. And we really appreciate your time. Your story's remarkable. And I think you're doing exactly what you were instructed to, which is to tell us that we don't need to fear death. And I really believe that your message is right, spot on, 100%. So the more people we can get that message out to, the better off we're all going to be here.
Absolutely. And what you do too, Mark, is absolutely extraordinary. You're doing fantastic work with this channel.
Really appreciate it, John. We'll talk to you soon, and we'll put your information in the show notes, and we'll talk to you down the road on yet another podcast to see what's going on.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.